Hello everyone, welcome to this short video introducing the concepts of stigma. I'm Nathan Loynes. The theoretical content of this video is drawn from Solanke, Discrimination as Stigma, 2017, and Thompson, Anti-Discriminatory Practice. I'll give you those references in full towards the end of the video. So my aims and objectives today are to provide an initial definition of the concept of stigma and what it involves, to define the relationship between stigma, prejudice, discrimination, stereotyping and deviance, to introduce how the above concepts contribute towards our socialisation and construction of lay theories about others. So let's have a look at the first one of those. This is drawn from Solanke, as I say. What is stigma? Well, one of the most seminal texts on stigma was written by Irving Goffman in the 1960s. However, the concept of stigma is far older than Goffman's 1960s analysis. Stigma is an ancient social construct. In its essence, a stigma is a mark. So it's from the ancient Greek or Greek mark meaning stigma. You may have heard of stigmata, whereby people bleed from the same points where Christ was crucified on the cross, bleeding from the wrist and bleeding from the side and so on. Stigmata is bleeding from a mark. So stigma from the ancient Greek for mark. The Oxford Thesaurus lists synonyms of stigma as shame, disgrace, dishonour, ignominy, opprobrium and humiliation. So it's always good to define our terms when we're looking at a concept. So what does stigma involve? Stigmatisation is low, unobtrusive and genteel in its effect. So much so that when the stigmatised hit back physically, they can technically be accused of being the first to resort to force. So what we're trying to say here is that stigmatisation is like a passive-aggressive act. It's very, very subtle, and we only get to see it taking place when someone hits back against that stigmatisation and discrimination and is perceived to be unreasonable. But actually it's been taking place bubbling under the surface, going under most people's radar prior to the actual blow-up. Stigmatisation is a highly sophisticated form of violence insofar as it is rarely associated with physical threats or attacks. It can be best compared to those forms of psychological torture in which the victim is broken psychically and physically but left with no outward appearances and left unmarked. So that's Steven Pinker cited in Solanke on page 18. Very subtle form of violence. Stigma should not be confused with deviance, stereotyping and prejudice, as both stigma and deviance refer to a departure from a putative standard or norm. Some authors use the terms interchangeably. However, deviance is usually applied to rule-breaking behaviour, such as criminality, which is not essential for stigma to happen. So let's have a look at the relationship between stigma and deviance. Stigma is broader than deviance. It relates to what people are as well as what they do. This difference produces what may be the clearest distinction between stigmatisation and deviance, the possibility of repair. So what we're saying here is that the stigmatised person is seen to be inherently problematic. Deviant behaviour can be seen as a phase. So when a person commits a deviant act, we believe in society that that person can be rehabilitated and they can make reparation, and that harm that they did to society, let's say stealing sweets from a local shop, can be repaired by punishment and remorse. However, the stigmatised person, the problem is seen to be much deeper. It's something inherently wrong with their personality or makeup, and it can't be repaired. It's something ingrained within the individual. Let's have a look at the relationship between stigma and stereotyping. Stereotyping is different from stigma. According to psychologists, human beings categorise as an efficient means of processing large amounts of information. In other words, we are kind of prone towards stereotyping, so each time we meet a new occurrence, we don't have to start from scratch. It's a handy sort of pigeonholing tool that we use in our day-to-day lives to make social interaction more manageable and more bearable. However, when we stereotype, we generally ascribe negative beliefs to those in those categories. You can think of things like gender, race, and things like that, social class, if you like, and how we stereotype associations around those things. So, for example, young black men are stereotyped as criminal delinquents. The number of such young people who have lost their lives while standing on a street illustrate how dangerous stereotypes can be. Let's have a look at the relationship between stigma and prejudice. Stigma is a distinct form of, but linked to, prejudice. A stigma is described as a condition that engenders prejudice and discrimination. Stigmatized people are always the target of prejudice. It is also argued that stigma and prejudice occur at different levels. Stigma resides in the structure and relations of society, but prejudice resides in the minds of individuals. You may be able to link this to Thompson's PCS analysis, in that how prejudice and can be held psychologically, but stigma requires a social relationship, a cultural and social relationship between individuals to take place. So an individual can carry on through life with prejudicial beliefs about a group of people, but maybe not implement the stigmatizing effects. You can think about mental health, for example, about what we assume about people with mental health issues, that they're all dangerous, and the further associations through stigmatization that we make in our relations with them. And then the knock-on effect that those people who are the way that those stigmatized people behave and then come to believe about themselves. Let's have a look at prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice can also be differentiated from discrimination in that prejudice is an attitudinal bias, an avertive or hostile attitude towards a person who belongs to a particular group, simply because he or she belongs to that group. Discrimination is behavioural, including practices and actions. So as I said in the previous slide, we can hold prejudices but not act on them. When we come to act on our prejudices, that becomes discrimination. So as I said earlier, here we've got Thompson's PCS analysis and making a link to how Thompson would be able to interpret stigma and prejudice. So prejudice is something that we hold psychologically or personally within ourselves. It's only when we start behaving or acting out our prejudices that stigma occurs, and that can occur, that stigmatization can occur at sort of interpersonal or cultural level in our day-to-day interactions with folks, but it also can be seen in things like the media or institutions like education or health services, for example, where that stigmatization becomes structural. Let's have a look at I think it's the final one of my learning objectives today, which is socialization and lay theories. Socialization covers almost every aspect of life. From the moment we're born to the moment we pop off, we are being socialized by the experiences we have. And how we respond to mental illness is also a process of how we are socialized. So you can reflect on your own experiences of growing up and maybe recently about the kind of experiences that you've had which may have shaped your attitudes towards people with mental health difficulties. People develop conceptions of mental illness early on in life as part of the socialization of our culture. So it's no accident really that people that we believe to be mad are also believed to be dangerous. Once in place, people's conceptions become a lay theory about what it means to have a mental illness. This is what Solanke calls a connotative response, or we have connotations. So we think that people who are mentally ill are mad, and people that are mad are dangerous, or people that are mentally not typical are mad or crazy and chaotic and these things and difficult to converse with. There's lots of connotations associated. People form expectations as to whether most people will reject an individual with mental illness as a friend, employee, neighbour or intimate partner. So here we're starting to value or devalue people. And whether most people will devalue a person with mental illness as less trustworthy, intelligent, or competent. So here we can see that trustworthiness, intelligence, and competence become to be connotative of people that have mental illness. And everyone, with various levels of education or whatever, moves through life with various connotative associations about what people with mental health difficulties are, whether they're less trustworthy, less intelligent, less competent, and so on. Lay theories influence social inclusion and exclusion. Once we have acquired these ideas through socialization, they become a lay theory or basic foundation for social interaction, i.e., do you cross the street when you see a person coming down the street who may be, say, talking to themselves or something else, illustrative of maybe a mental health difficulty. Socialization is therefore a dual process of social inclusion and exclusion. It sets patterns for social interaction and sorts those who may partake in a social interaction from those who may not. So what we're talking here is how do we include people to contribute, but also exclude people from making contributions? And do we make that judgment on inclusion or exclusion on our judgments of whether they have a mental health difficulty? And as Solanke would say then, the connotative implications of what it means to have a mental health difficulty. Are they less trustworthy? Their communication is more confused, etc., etc. Those who may not participate or who are excluded and not included are marginalised through the use of stigma, and they may be shunned socially, culturally, and institutionally. So in summary, I've provided an initial definition of the concept of stigma and what it involves. I've tried to distinguish the relationship between stigma, prejudice, discrimination, stereotyping, and deviance. I've also introduced how the above concepts contribute towards our socialization, and it happens to all of us, and how we all construct lay theories, workable theories that enable us to get through life more efficiently, if you like, despite some of those theories being wrong or less accurate in terms of their core connotations or associations. As I say, here are the references on which I've based the theoretical content of this video. If you'd like to understand the concepts in more detail, please visit these texts. They are interesting in themselves, and they will deepen your understanding and maybe improve your self-awareness of maybe when you are discriminating or acting according to a lay theory and connotations around stigma.